in your groups, you're going to do something called the albatross activity, which I'll explain in a second here. So after that, we'll do a little bit of a warm-up, go over some more advanced rhetorical devices, and then later do a little bit of a speech analysis at the very end, just to see how like everything ties together, and practicing how to kind of develop sophistication for any sort of reading that you're giving altogether here. So the first activity that took a while to set up, but we'll see how it goes. It's okay if there's mess ups. It's more about the process rather than finding the answer altogether here. So the activity is called albatross soup. And if you don't know what an albatross is, it's basically this bird right here in front of you. Give you a little bit more context clue. These are usually hunted by sailors at sea, just because if they're lacking of food, there's a ton of albatross around, so they use this as their primary source of food if they can't get any protein, whatever, on the ships. But otherwise, the scenario for everybody is this. In a moment, you're going to be going into your breakout room where your group leader is going to host the discussion, but also host the activity altogether. Everyone's going to try solving this riddle except the group leaders. So the riddle is, a man walks off a boat. He walks into a restaurant, orders the albatross soup. He takes one bite, pulls out a gun, and kills himself. Why did the man kill himself? And so for your groups, your entire task is to simply ask questions. Other players within the group are only allowed to ask yes or no questions to infer, and the host will only respond to yes or no questions. So in this case, if the contestant asks something like, what is an albatross? You can't answer that as a host because it's not a yes or no question. So in this case, unless they ask you something like, did the island have a lot of albatross? Then you can say yes or no in that case. So with that in mind, every group will have about 10 minutes or so to ask as many questions to figure out the answer. If you feel like you know the answer after a series of questions, then you can try to submit an answer. But for every person, you only get 2. So as an example, let's say your group leader, Kenny, is a group leader, and someone in his group decides to throw out 2 answers after a series of questions. If they're both wrong, that person cannot ask, or they can't throw an answer out anymore, but they can still ask questions. So in this case, after 10 minutes, we'll see what you came up with, and then later we'll kind of like put together our answers to figure out, you know, how close you were and all that there. So at this point, I'm going to open the option to unmute yourself if you have questions, but at this point, does anyone have any other questions for how this works?
Can the other players group up together and like think of the questions beforehand?
So all the players are going to be asking questions at the same time, basically.
Okay.
And you can ask as many questions as you like. Even if you have tried your 2 answers, you can still ask questions with the group itself.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? Good? All right, so if we are good, I am simply going to open up the breakout rooms, and then later, wherever you are, you will go. If you did not have a group, I'm simply going to have you go into the main chat with me here, and then we'll see if we can figure it out as a group in the main chat here. Some people did make a group, but the problem was that I didn't get a leader from them, so I'm going to keep you here regardless, and then later we'll just see how far you get with your groups here. So any last questions before we begin? All right, with that being, oh, no, go ahead, you good? All right, with that being said, you should get the invites right now. And then later, we're at 2:11 right now. Let's see if all the groups can get back around 2:22. I'll make a small announcement if we need to, and then later we'll just move from there. All right, here we go. You should be invited to your room at this point. And if you're part of a group but I didn't put you in there, just let me know, because I think some people missed it. Like, I think, that's right, Chris, you're part of the other group there. Let me move you through real quick here.
Yeah, I'm on mobile, so I don't know.
No worries. Do you remember who your group members were? Like, is that the RJ group?
Oh yeah, I'm in the RJ group and I'm on mobile too. Sorry, man.
Here, let me see real quick. Sorry, it's very non-intuitive. What do you call it? Interface here. So
It's okay. I think I could just hop on a Discord because the other four in it.
all right, that's fine. Let me just see if I can assign more people in here as well. So
I think I'm in Brandon's group, Mr. Lin.
yeah. I just need to find their group and put you in their breakout room 2. All right, there you go. I'm gonna put you in breakout room 3 for the sake of it, Chris. Okay, Who's everybody else? All right, one more. Breakout room 10. Okay, so with everybody here then, I know you might have chosen a group, but I wasn't able to add you in the list earlier because you might have came in a little bit late, or that it's kind of difficult to, what do you call it, make groups and so forth here. So no worries, we'll do the activity here with this group. It's a big ass group, so we'll see if we can get this done as best as possible here. So here's the sort of procedure. I'm just going to kind of take in as many yes and no questions as you can throw out. You can do it in the group chat, or you can verbally just contribute your question here. So I open the floor for any questions on the riddle here. Why did the man kill himself? I'll take any questions here right now.
Does that have something to do with the soup?
Yes.
Poison in the soup?
So Anna said, was the soup bad? No. Does it have to, wait, so what's the last question?
Was there poison in the soup?
There was no poison.
Will you let us know of the ingredients of the soup?
No. Yes. Besides that, ingredients. Like, I'm not gonna tell you like the chicken broth and the salt and whatever. But there was albatross.
Was there anything else other than albatross as meat?
Besides what you would normally find in soup, no. But don't spoil it.
What was the soup like uncooked or something?
No. Yes. Soup is good. They did not have food on the boat.
Sounds like this guy is the hunger artist.
He was slightly on the boat for a while. But no. Does it have to do with hunt or hunter? No. The man eat something else? Yes.
Yeah, he ate a bullet.
Was anyone else with the man?
Do you mean what time frame?
I think like as he was eating soup.
It's a restaurant, so yes. Did he eat someone? Yes. No, did not eat someone on the boat.
Did he bite his own finger?
No.
Well, I have no idea.
Let's keep some questions out. Yes, he did that. Does he know the person he ate? Yes. Is that person related to him? No. Can you define related though? You mean like by blood? By blood, no. Do you have a relationship with the person? Yes. No, it was just regular albatross soup. All right, keep coming with questions. I'm gonna join a group real quick to kind of just answer a question. I'll be back in a quick moment here. You guys had a question?
Oh yeah, Mr. Lin.
Yeah.
So she asked, was the soup what he wanted?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
Because that's kind of tricky.
Yes, he wants albatross soup. All right, I'm gonna leave now.
Wait. When do we go in or go back?
No, not yet. I'm just here to answer that question.
No, but when are we going back? At 22?
I'll extend a little bit longer. Keep asking
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Sorry, I thought it was unmuted, but any other questions?
Is this all the context?
This is all the immediate context you get.
Does this man have a backstory
Yes.
that you're not willing to tell us?
I'm willing, but you have to ask the questions. Does it have to do with the alternative meaning to albatross? Yes.
What is the alternative meaning?
Is the man a fisherman? No. Yes, for Joanna's. Yes, for Anna's.
So the man ate someone, so he killed himself out of guilt.
Yes.
Is that an answer or not?
That's about half of the answer, but it's the main part here. Anyone want to infer why he had to eat his wife?
Because she was holding him back. I don't know.
That's a great question. Sorry, baby, you're holding me back. I eat you now.
Wait, but didn't you say that the only time you ate was the restaurant?
No. Hold on, I'm going to answer that question in a second, but Herman's asking, is he behind on slaughter? No. Joanna asked the question. Yes, for Joanna's. For debts, yes.
So is there a slaughter?
No.
Is there did the restaurant owner serve the man the soup?
Yes.
Does that mean? Wait, so the man ate someone while I was on the boat?
No. His wife was albatross? No. His wife's not a bird. All right. Did he accidentally eat his wife? Oh, yes.
So that means the restaurant owner gave the man his wife?
No.
So he accidentally ate his wife from the soup?
No.
Did the restaurant owner kill his wife and then feed him the soup?
No. Did the albatross soup remind the man of his wife? Yes.
Wait, I'm so confused.
Is the albatross in the soup with his wife? No. When he ate his wife, he thought it was albatross, but when he was at the restaurant eating albatross, it wasn't what he thought it was. Yes.
Okay, so he died from guilt.
Yep. Pretty close. And that's pretty much on the mark there. So we're going to kind of watch the answer unravel. I'm going to close the breakout rooms in a second here, and we'll see how this actually plays out. But I want to see what other groups also came up with here. So I'm going to close the rooms real quick, and we can bring everybody back into the main hall.
So the man walks, since he was on a boat, he was going to an island. And on the island, there was a restaurant. So go inside the restaurant and eats the soup?
Yes.
So let's say this man is like not the only one. There probably were other people who have done the same thing.
Yes.
So does this mean? Wait. So albatross. I forgot the name of person who said there was an alternative meaning to albatross.
Catherine.
Catherine said that the albatross was a burden.
Yes.
Right. So what I'm trying to understand here is that the man kills himself because of guilt.
Yes.
Other people have done the same.
Yes.
But the restaurant owner is still there, and he's trying to serve guilt. He's trying to serve people guilt as his main soup.
You can see it symbolically like that, but not exactly that way. So I'm going to end our group, at least in this case here. And then later, I think other groups came up with their answers and so forth. I did want to see what people were kind of building up, but because of time, that's kind of on my bad here. I want to show you the answer for this one here. So we'll start with that, and then we'll move on to our next section here. So I'm going to make the discussion real quick, and then later we will kind of watch a small little clip over here. All right, hopefully you all can see this pretty clearly. And then
Scared.
Here we go. Hopefully you can hear this.
A man walks off a boat. He walks into a restaurant, orders the albatross soup. He takes one bite, pulls out a gun, and kills himself. Why did the man kill himself?
And this man isn't like the president of the United States, or there isn't something really singularly important about this particular man.
No.
Is he a war vet?
No.
Is he a criminal?
No.
Is he the captain of the boat?
No.
Wait, what happens with the boat? How do you get to a restaurant by boat?
Is it a cruise ship?
No.
Ferry.
Motorboat.
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 No.
Is this boat like a rescue boat?
Yeah.
Was he stranded on an island?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
Did he just feel worthless because Tom Hanks did it so much better?
Did that island have other people on it?
Yes.
He was stranded on an island. Boat picked him up.
He walks into the restaurant with a gun. Orders the albatross soup.
And kills himself.
Why can't I understand?
I think we need to keep working backwards.
Is he married?
Yes.
And that's why. Did he kill her?
No.
Was his wife alive when he killed himself?
No.
Okay.
Was he crazy?
Is there any paranormal activity?
No.
Wormholes.
The albatross is actually him.
Wormholes.
That's actually him.
Wormholes.
It's actually him. He's making a sentence. Is it bigger?
By albatross.
I've been watching too much X-Files.
That'd be trippy shit.
Is there an albatross on the island?
Yes.
Did he try to shoot the albatross with his gun?
Yes.
Did he miss?
Yes.
Starvation?
Yes.
Was the wife the first person to starve?
Yes.
Was that his wife's dying wish? That he try albatross?
No.
Why the albatross? They don't make soup out of albatross usually, right?
Well, albatrosses are usually like symbols for things that weigh you down.
The symbol of guilt.
Did somebody say like this soup is so good you're gonna want to kill yourself?
Like, did he like go in with the intention of killing himself?
No.
It's the flavor of the soup.
Yes.
Did it trigger a memory of some kind?
Yes.
Why would he choose to order the soup if it like reminded trigger
the island?
Yeah.
Wait. He ordered an albatross soup. Did he get an albatross soup?
Yes.
Had he eaten albatross before?
No.
They made the soup on the island with the birds?
No.
Like, was his wife turned into soup and then...
Did they tell him that it was an albatross?
Oh, God.
Oh my god.
What the fuck? That's literally insane.
That's so fucked up.
Okay, let's do a recap again real quick.
A stormy night at sea. Passengers on a small yacht.
They got stranded on an island with a group of people. They started to starve. The wife died. They eat her, but they tell him it was albatross soup.
And when he goes into the restaurant,
to assuage his guilt, the first thing he wants to do is know with certainty that he did not eat his wife. And when he takes a sip of the delicious albatross soup,
And he was like, this doesn't taste like
This isn't fucking albatross, those liars.
He's like, holy shit, this is albatross, and I was eating my goddamn wife.
And he kills himself.
Yep.
that was great. You got it? That was hard and disgusting.
So that's the riddle of the albatross soup, and it's funny because a lot of you actually got really close to it, and good on you, right? It takes a lot of yeah, they're cheering, which is kind of messed up, but that was the point there. Oh, careful, Mohammed, if you eat some albatross soup, might trigger some bad memories. But anyways, from what I was hearing from a lot of people in the group chat and also in our bigger group here, a lot of people were actually really close to getting the answer altogether. A lot of people were inferring some good questions, but that was my point with today's lesson here as our starter, which took a little longer than I'd like to, but no worries. Maybe we'll get this towards the end in terms of theories that you guys came up with, because I'm pretty sure there's some weird ones that you came up with, but it's not just a riddle. The albatross soup story is actually something we call lateral thinking, which is what you do oftentimes in schools, but also in life, is what we call linear thinking, where there's a path, there's a problem, and there's a clear solution. There's a one-step process, right? And you can attribute this to question and answer tasks that you get in school or plug and chug equations you get in math. And so in this case, a lot of times schools teach you to approach things in a linear way so that you basically arrive at the same conclusion that everyone else does. But lateral thinking requires you to take some information to go around the particular problem in ways that you can find multiple solutions or inferences or what have you that are outside of your sort of general field of vision. And so in this case, I want to start off with this here because a lot of sophistication comes from lateral thinking, where it's very easy to pick up things like tone, for example, or voice, for example, but that won't earn you sophistication because you're thinking in a way where everyone's seeing the same thing, basically. You want to be able to dig out particular information or inferences or analysis that are way out there, or things that just people don't see commonly, right? And it's the small little nuances that allow you to do so. You have to question the text in its entirety altogether. And so it kind of goes back to some of the general questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how, where for any piece, rather than just simply summarize or tell us what do you know from it, it's more so of asking these particular questions with every text you're given. And this will help you earn sophistication for not even just the AP exam, but really for any college paper or for any sort of analysis paper you're given. So we oftentimes think about the general requirements of a text, but we add another level to it, right? So if we're asking who is the author exactly, we're also thinking about their intentions. What is the circumstance that drives this piece? Does time matter? Does the setting have significance? Why these particular choices? Why write with an M dash? Why write with semicolon, all that? What is the significance of that? Why is the author desiring of making these points? And maybe as a more difficult level, as a reader, what effects are imparted onto me? But even more sophisticated, how might a different audience react? Because every author's writing for a particular audience. It's for everybody, sure, but a graduation speech, for example, is for a graduating class. So in that case, then, can you empathize or can you brainstorm what that particular audience might react to? What part of the information would stick with them? And that usually earns you sophistication when you can think about all the small little choices the author makes. And to kind of go on before I go into the sort of nitty-gritty stuff of the content today, a lot of teachers design their classes with something what we call Webb's depth of knowledge. And this is something that you might want to look at yourself one day, where Webb's depth of knowledge basically is what is it that you're really doing in school and what do you need to do more of? And the problem with a lot of schooling is this. A lot of schools and classes and everything keep everything at level 1, recalling. And it's actually a bittersweet thing. It's not easy to remember stuff. It's not easy to memorize texts or formulas or whatever, right? But if you think about it, despite it being difficult to memorize stuff, it's not a difficult task to do because you're not really applying anything. All you're doing is repeating, recalling, reciting, reporting, listing. You're just doing things where, hey, do you remember what happened on page 30? Yes, I do. It was this. And even though, you know, a good memory definitely helps you with different situations, it doesn't really do anything for you as a person, or it doesn't help you with critical thinking, or it doesn't even aim for sophistication. Pretty much after high school or anything else, it ceases to serve any, you know, actual relevance. So if you see the kid in class who has memorized the entire chapter of a book, you might think, wow, that's a genius. Okay, well, that genius is not really going to use that information, you know, past those doors of class, right? But what you really should be developing more is more of over here, of level 4 thinking. And so in this case, the things that we really like you to try doing more in your life when you're dealing with any text is, can you synthesize, can you make connections, can you apply concepts, can you critique and analyze? And really, even though I throw these texts at you and all of that, it's more so of helping you move from level 1 eventually to level 4, so that when you walk out of the high school doors, you're able to see any text given to you and critique and analyze and approve and whatever, right? Don't just limit yourself to memorization. Memorization in the long run is pretty useless because you can draw information out, but you know, so what, right? So I got 2 things I want to do together as a class today. The first one's a quick warm-up, and the second one is more of a speech analysis. So the first one here, we have to consider every small detail of a text. And I picked a small little piece here, A Little Fable by Franz Kafka, because it kind of does the job in terms of being able to apply asking questions, because his works are so cryptic and a little bit, you know, free for all for the message here. So in the document that I shared with you guys, there should be this small little story and a couple of questions that come afterwards here. So here's the deal. The story goes like this. Alas, said the mouse, the world is growing smaller every day. At the beginning, it was so big that I was afraid. I kept running and running, and I was glad when at last I saw walls far away to the right and left. But these long walls have narrowed so quickly that I am the final last chamber already. And there in the corner stands the trap that I must run into. You only need to change your direction, said the cat, and ate it up. And so if we were doing like very linear thinking, very like level 1 stuff, I simply would ask you things like, you know, what happened in the story, or what do you think it means? Maybe that's level 2, right? At most 3. But I got a couple more questions for you, and it deals a lot with asking questions. You have to ask questions on the small little weird details that authors choose to prove their point. So these 3 questions give you a few minutes to analyze and to work yourself here. My 3 questions are these. Number 1, why did Kafka use the anthropomorphic, which basically means like personification for animals, right? The anthropomorphic characters of cat and mouse. Number 2, why does the mouse consider that its only option was to run? What might that mean? And lastly, why does the cat offer advice only to eat the mouse? And so these are things that aren't explicitly being asked from the text, but as a reader, I'm thinking like, well, what does that mean? Or why that? So I'm gonna give you a few minutes to answer these particular questions, and we'll see what responses you come up with. And if you have your own questions from this piece here, feel free to throw those out and also to answer them yourselves here. So I'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes. See if you can kind of use that to answer the question here. All right, so that was about 2 minutes on my clock. If you're still working through those questions, no worries. But I just want to see what people came up with in regards to these 3 questions here. So we'll kind of like do them one at a time, right? And just see what we kind of come up with all together here. So for the very first one, it's going to ask that general question of, okay, well, why in this particular allegory then, this little story, this fable, why cat and mouse? Anyone want to throw an idea out for that one here? And I'll do the option of you can unmute yourself to contribute your ideas if you have one. Go for it.
I think that it's because like, well, cat and mouse, it's that instead of utilizing like real life characters, then like by using objective of subjects, the audience can come to the conclusion the author intends to without like prior biases.
That's a good point, actually. And I want to go back real quick to Millie's first throw out because of the dynamic they're associated with. So in this case, we already know this tension. We know this sort of like, cat and mouse game, this back and forth, this predator and prey. But as Andre mentions, he also uses this because if you put like real life characters, humans, humans are very subjective. Animals are symbolically, at least, more objective. Kimberly puts in, copy this paste real quick. The cat and mouse symbolize a world of the powerful and the weak, where the inferior have to run away from persecution and suffering from the superior through whatever it means. Good point. And so going back to like predator and prey, it seems like the story here is more about those in charge versus those who, are born into poverty or those who don't own any power or whatever. It's that dynamic. Good catch. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Sold. Got another from Andrew over here. I'll copy paste this one as well. So for this one, the mouse is a metaphor for a person, the cat's death. What a person needs to escape. It's something that is forever existing, but we try to avoid. And that's another good analysis on this one here when we're trying to like fill the 2 items up here, right? So if Kimberly was seeing this more from like a systemic thing, this one's more about a humanity thing. We are all, as I think that's Zoran throwing out, we're all inevitable to basically meet death in this case here. Something that we try to avoid. All right. If no others for now, I'll move on to number 2. But if you do have one, no worries. You can definitely throw it out if you like. So for number 2, I'm just going to project that question one more time just so we all see it. What does a mouse consider, or why does a mouse consider that its only option was to run? What might that mean in this context here? Anybody want to answer this one for number 2? Why is running the only answer?
I think that since the walls are closing down in, it kind of symbolized like a sort of tunnel vision where the mouse has only one sight, and it's like the goal is like slowly starting to like narrow, and he only has like, he starts to lose types of options, even though that they're like, you can go behind, underground, above, through the wall even, but it's only because of their like their tunnel vision and their not really inability, but just that they didn't do it, just like they didn't pick other options, and it was just like out of instinct to just run.
I think it's a really good analysis in this case as well, especially tunnel vision, because it really is the description of that. As you go in further yourself, you're narrowing yourself down where you're focusing only on one goal rather than considering all the options altogether here. Our segment threw out that you can't pay death to live longer. So in this case, maybe it's true, right? You can't basically pay the person that is the one who's hunting you to give you more time. They're going to claim you eventually here. Melly mentions the mouse might represent people with conditioned beliefs. Yeah, absolutely. Where this mouse basically grew up and thought to itself, this is the only way I can live life. This is the only way where I can go until someone clarifies it for them here. Kimberly throws out, maybe to explore the world and their potential before they die. Yeah, it seems like a lot of the story is suggesting that you should do that instead, because death is not an option most people want. So it seems to be that Kafka perhaps suggests that we should explore other alternatives and all that there. Ivy mentions, despite there being other options and choices, those options seem too difficult or hard to reach, and so there's only one option left to choose and to blindly run, but is a fatal one. Yes. So in this case, we sort of like tricked ourselves, or we sort of like limit ourselves. And so at that point of our lives, we kind of accept just because we've been circumstanced to do so. Andrew has another one here where I want to throw out on this sheet. The walls could possibly reference how the story of your life, you have so many options, but as time goes on, the walls continue to narrow and close these opportunities that we could have, purely because we chose to follow this one path where we eventually become trapped between a rock and a hard place. Good. And like that little bit of a euphemism at the end over there to describe the situation here. Kenny throws out, the mouse is much like a human, where in the early stages of life, it is a more open environment, although dark, to run around and explore. As it enters the last chamber or the stage of almost death, it narrows down to accepting death or going back. Yep. And so a lot of human life seems to be acceptance, that we don't have any more alternatives, that we are simply just taking what we have as the final option here. And then Mohammed, the last one here, and I know the text is getting smaller and smaller, that you can take it slow in life instead of wanting something else. We want to become older when we are young and become younger when we are old. This running is looking at the future while not appreciating the present. Absolutely. That seems to be a story of mortality, where this mouse at first was running, pretty fast, right? It was living really fast and just thinking like, this is the way to go. But eventually it meets its maker and dies because of that then. So I want to move us to the third option here, the third question, which is, why does a cat then offer advice only to eat the mouse? Why have this particular grim ending? Anyone inferred or thought about here? What do you all think of this one here? Seems kind of sadistic to tell you how it is and then die and kill you.
I first considered like the story and what would happen like if it was omitted. So I think that the author could have like simply just said that like the cat ate the mouse, right? Mm-hmm. But I think he specifically does so to like finally argue that it's necessary to like seek discomfort, in that you can't always just run in a straight line. The cat says that like you need to like change directions in order to survive, right?
So it's almost like it has to be grim to convince us that this is sort of the negative choice, the bad choice.
Sort of.
I see Catherine's hand. Go ahead.
I thought it was symbolism for like how, at the end, like there's the cat and then it eats it because it's kind of like symbolism for like how short life is, and then you don't realize how like you could live it until you're almost dead.
I think it's a really valid point too, that a lot of people start regretting all the things they could have done, especially when they're at that deathbed altogether. It's kind of a weird story. I don't know if I should be telling this or whatever, but this came up in an email just this morning, actually. So you probably have no idea who this person is, but it just made me think about life altogether. There's a teacher at YB back in 2018 who left, and you might know the story of Mr. V. If you don't know, a quick summary, he got in trouble because he was an alcoholic, and he was drinking, supervising I think it was a basketball game, and he got in a confrontation with parents and all that. And if you don't remember him, whatever, right? But the guy was like maybe late 40s at most. He left YB because of that issue. But here's the trippy part that I was weirded out. This morning he passed away. That was part of the email that I got this morning from Miss Paulette, and I was thinking to myself, like, just 2 years ago, I knew this person, and despite the fact that there's really no connection that I had with him, but I'm just thinking like late 40s, that's still really young. He made some dumb mistakes at that basketball game, whatever, but I just wonder like just the life choices that he may have regretted at those moments there, and just thinking about like all the things he's done in his life and all that, you know what I mean? And just thinking at that moment where just, as Jaren mentions this line here, a feeling of regret in life, you know what I mean? And I wonder, I don't know, it was really surreal. I just thought about it and I was like, geez, that's very, very awkward of a situation here. But kind of digress. I want to kind of put a few more answers in here. So let me see what we got here. I think it was Kenny's that we didn't get a chance to. I'm sorry, it was Brandon's. No, it was hard segments. So let me just copy and paste a few more here to kind of discuss and throw in. He mentions that the ending is only, quote, grim to us, but the cat and mouse are acting off of instinct. Good point. That's actually a good point considering the first point here where this is simply out of their own drive and will. So it's natural, quote unquote. But for us, because we put like significance into our lives, it is grim in that way there. I'll take a few more. I know some good answers in the chat here. But with Brandon's, he writes, sometimes the advice we give to others are often neglected or possibly condemned by the people because they're shredded by their beliefs. Hence the tunnel vision, which ultimately leads to the mouse demise. Yeah, absolutely, right? And it's kind of like sad because it's until you hear it from the person who's going to ruin you or the bad situation that you learn your lesson. And the people who've been like warning you your entire life, you don't really listen to them for the most part. I'm running out of room, so I'll just kind of like read these out first, and later we'll go into hands first. Kenny writes that when you have realized that you didn't live life to the fullest on your deathbed, sometimes already too late to go back and relive it. Yeah, absolutely. Because at that moment, the mouse could, but based on how, like, if this is like a big metaphor for life or age or whatever, then at this point it's too late, right? You can't turn back anymore. And then later I'll read one more to close before going to Mohammed's hand over here. Shayla writes that the cat realizes the easiest way to eat the mouse is to build trust in the mouse. It's like when the trust is in a relationship. It's easy to take advantage of each other. Like when an author wants to persuade an audience, he first has to build trust with the audience to successfully persuade them. That's a good point. So it seems like if this cat is death or fate or what have you, it has persuaded us all along to run in this direction, to persuade us thinking that it's the only way, until we get to it and it tells us, no, sorry, I was tricking you all along. Mohammed, if you can, go ahead and throw one out to us.
Shows that the advice of your enemies is dangerous, how predatory the world truly is, where people can take advantage of you, the more narrow your options become.
That's a good point, that even good advice comes from your worst enemies, and they will ruin you in this case here. So here's a reason why I wanted to get this here. Actually, I'll throw in Jaren's real quick too, because he kind of came in at a good spot. He wrote that, I think it evokes a feeling of regret in life. The walls narrowed down, meaning that we didn't partake the opportunities we were given. The cat saying you should only take the other direction means that you should have done what you wanted to do before it was too late. And I hope you see sort of a trend with today's lesson, because if you think about the first thing I gave you guys, it was lateral versus linear thinking. This mouse is doing linear thinking, basically. It thinks in one direction, it goes in one direction. And if you do that, life kind of tells you that you should have done something else. You should have done something to basically avoid it. But with lateral thinking and kind of like approaching your life differently, you can actually sort of like, you know, take control and perhaps explore the alternatives. The problem is people do lateral thinking too late in their lives. You know what I mean? So in this case, you want to be careful with how much linear thinking you're doing and to kind of like pursue more of exploring different horizons and all that there. So that's kind of like the theme of today's class, if anything else. I'll read one more before we transition here. Annie throws in over here. I think it's a situation where you're trying to find a way out of your problems, but you're too narrow-minded to think about other ways to overcome the obstacles to the point where your problems eat you up. Absolutely. And that's one of the dangers of linear thinking. You play by the rules and the rules will consume you, because that's how the system works. And just as a last analogy, it's kind of like when poor people try to change the system through the system itself. It doesn't work that way because it's how the system basically played you. You know what I mean? So here's the deal. I want to do a little bit of lecture with you guys before we go to our last analysis. So this might end a little bit later, so I apologize for that. But I promise you the ending speech that we analyze is pretty good, actually. So here's a small little lecture here. I want to go over some devices with you, things that you should know by the AP exam and things that you might want to know for the AP exam. By default, these are things that you should have learned the entire year in terms of the basic rhetorical devices. And even if you're not like super confident in using these, you've been using them for the most part altogether, right? Maybe like one or two or a few, you're kind of like, I kind of know, I kind of don't know. That's okay. Just having this general arsenal of rhetorical devices, you're pretty much good for the evidence section of the AP exam. So the AP exam's evidence section asks for about like 3 or 4 or so devices. If you can pull a couple of these and throw them in, you're good for the AP exam. But there are a couple more that can help you earn sophistication. And chances are, as you're looking at this list, you're thinking like, whoa, what jungle did you pull these words out of? You know what I mean? These are super exotic. Yes, they are. And these are words and terms and so forth that you don't really need to know per se, but it definitely helps you with sophistication. But if anything, it's more about questioning what authors are actually doing in their writing, right? It's kind of like, what are some of all the different things you can experiment with when you're doing your own writing? Don't think you're only writing essays your whole life. Eventually, you're gonna be writing your own essays yourself for like newspapers, for magazines, for editorials, for anything that you're proposing an idea out of. And a lot of authors will use some of these devices to persuade or to make their point here. So I want to go over at least 14 of them with you today real quickly, just to see what authors are doing in their work and see if you can find them in other pieces later on. Because again, you can pretty much find all of these in the works that we've read so far and in the future that you will read. But these are the kind of the tricky ones. These are the ones that kind of like separates the good writers from the great writers, sort of. So we'll kind of go through the list and I'll spend no more than like a minute or so for each one here. So here's the first one. And to talk about Jonathan, meiosis, yes, is a biology term, but it's also a rhetorical device term because I guess we ran out of words and we wanted to borrow some from science. I don't know, but here we go. So the first one's akismus, and basically it's a form of irony in which a person feigns indifference to or pretends to refuse something he or she desires. So this is a common allegory. I think I made this example before, but this is the allegory of the wolf and the grapes. So basically this wolf can't reach the grapes and he thinks, you know what, these grapes are probably sour, I don't want them, they suck. And so this is an akismus in the sense that we know the wolf wants this, but it's finding all the different ways to ignore it or all the ways to basically support itself. And some authors will use akismus because it's showing the irony of people's decisions, right? It's thinking about how people have these desires all throughout life, but they find all these excuses or rationales to keep them from what they actually pursue. Kind of like the mouse in the previous story where the mouse pretends that, you know, it couldn't find other alternatives and everything like that. It's indifferent, but, you know, there are solutions, right? So in this case, it's to expose and also to enlighten. We also have abomination. So in this case, it's the repetition of words in the same root. The difference lies in one sound or letter. So an example might be that snooze is what somebody, somewhere, wants to suppress. All the rest is advertising. And authors will use abomination to basically kind of emphasize on that root word or to make a sort of alliteration or to emphasize on the key words they use here. So in this case, they're kind of showing how news is something that people everywhere, either you know them or you don't, are trying to suppress that. It's just that big of an issue that we have a bunch of news being held back. Another example of domination might be like, he's a nobody. He knows nothing. He's not important. So it's a constant no, no, no. It's constantly negative. And authors oftentimes use domination to emphasize repetition in a way to kind of add that negativity to the situation altogether. Or not, just to emphasize the point they're making. Adeniton basically is when you're doing a hyperbole, but the exaggeration is like very extreme. It's impossible. It's in the hyperbole is magnified when it's like completely unfeasible. It's on the same level of like making euphemisms, right? So the example here is kind of like, I love to, what works best for you, when hell freezes over or when monkeys fly out of my butt? So both of those are extreme hyperboles, but they're also kind of like terms that we're all familiar with, right? Terms that we've seen people use, like raining cats and dogs or whatever. So it's kind of like extreme hyperboles that we put in to emphasize on the fact that it is impossible. Question here, domination, repetition of root, but alliteration, repetition of first letter. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Alliteration happens usually side by side. When pig flies, another one, yeah. But basically a domination is kind of both. Alliteration usually does happen because the root word starts with the same letter in this case here. So if you wanted to be a little bit more sophisticated and not just say repetition, you can notice the domination that happens in the text itself. Anadiplosis. I know some of these are kind of like weird pronunciations. Actually, all of them are. But in this one, it's another repetition. So a form of repetition in which the last word of one clause is repeated as the first word of the following clause or sentence. Okay, this is the part where it gets kind of like math equation-y. So I'll give you an example after I give this definition here. Only the final word of a sentence or clause must be repeated to qualify as anadiplosis. So in the example here, it's from the movie Gladiator. The guy says, they call for you. The general who became a slave. The slave who became a gladiator. The gladiator who defied an emperor. Striking story. And if you look at the bolded parts here, the next fragment, the next clause basically follows with whatever the last object that the list came off with. So slave to slave, gladiator to gladiator, and it shows the sort of like logical connection from one step to another. Authors who want to make a very sophisticated list will use Anadiplosis because they want to make sure that they show you the logos of how things transition and how things added on. So it's kind of like listing 2.0. It's the most sophisticated version of listing. Antenagoge, okay, another one, weird one, antenagoge. Putting a positive spin on something that is nevertheless acknowledged to be negative or difficult. So if you want to really attack the pathos of your reader, what you might do is something like this. If you see this woman here, she might be saying something like, I was laid off, but at least I can spend more time with my kids now. You can tell she's obviously not happy about being laid off, but she's trying to make the best of it. And so a lot of authors would use antagonology to put this in to kind of pull our heartstrings, where the people are trying their best to cope with the situation, but they can definitely express and reveal that there's so much more going on within them. So it's kind of like putting positive spin, but in the way where it makes you think about the issue that exists in the first hand. Chris mentioned we may be in quarantine, but at least I have time to sleep. Yeah, so in this case, you're kind of making the best of a bad situation, but the problem is we're in quarantine, you know what I mean? And a lot of people have been making jokes like that because they're doing antenagoge, where they're trying to like, emphasize on the situation here. Isn't it called optimism? It is, but it's kind of like dark optimism. I was shot, but at least I was shot. No, it's this restatement, it's repetition. Another weird one, anthemeria, the intentional misuse of one word's part of speech, such as using a noun for a verb. And we do this a lot in modern society, actually, where if you think about social media, the last topic we talked about in class, if you said something like, I Snapchatted, you're making Snapchat into a verb, but by default, it is, a noun. By default, it is a product. It has no verb form to it, but we made it into a verb form. So in this case, the English language, when authors are kind of like playing around with language and changing the verb form, they are doing anthemeria, where they're kind of like changing the bounds of what language can do. But the point they're trying to prove is that we still understand, what the word actually means. You know what I mean? It's kind of weird. Antiphrasis. A sentence or phrase that means the opposite of what it appears to say is pretty much verbal irony, but it's applied to common sayings and descriptions. So this is kind of the example I give to kind of make more use of it. So you see this scene over here is a courtroom, and we call this the court of law. That's the kind of conception that we all have. That's the norm that we have. But this guy here says, well, if it isn't the court of racially biased persecution, he's not wrong, but he's changing our expectations, right? He's saying the opposite of what it appears to be, or that we kind of expected from him to say. So in this case, antiphrasis is kind of like to criticize particular situations where we take what we usually kind of associate with it to, flip it around. What's the difference between antithesis? It kind of is one, right? It kind of is because you're disproving the first half of your sentence with sort of a contradiction or contrary. The only difference is that antithesis usually is two parts, two claims where you have a primary thesis and you kind of counter it a comma afterwards, or like a fragment or a clause afterwards there. Antiphrasis usually is in one sentence itself. Antonomasia, it's a weird one here. They're all weird. A descriptive phrase replaces a person's name. So antonomasia can range from lighthearted nicknames to epic names. So oftentimes we call something like, hey, Casanova, get over here, right? And Casanova like is an allusion to the movie Casanova and the sort of romance that exists in it. So in this case, we're basically saying that you're a romantic. The Bard of Avon was Shakespeare's nickname. So rather than call him Shakespeare or William Shakespeare or whatever, they called him the Bard of Avon, a title, something that's epic, right? Or in modern times, we call Donald Trump the Orange Man, Bad Orange Man, right? And so in this case, it's just little titles and nicknames that we give to people to associate and replace. And antonomasia is really good because it helps kind of like service satire in a way where you're alluding to something and everyone knows what you mean by that particular name there. No, that last one in the chat, no. I'm going to make a quick allusion, actually. There are things that you don't read from Shakespeare that are actually good. You read Romeo and Juliet, you might read like Macbeth, which is okay, but I'll make a quick aside, a quick tangent. So it's funny because I mentioned here, Orange Man is Donald Trump, and if you ever read King Lear, you're going to be like, wait, this book is, or this play is pretty much modern times. So the story is this for King Lear. You have an old king who likes only people who flatter him. He banishes those who criticize him. He goes crazy when his daughters betray him, and then at the end, everyone dies. it's pretty much the Trump presidency right now. You know what I mean? So just saying. It's a foreshadow. I'm obviously like shorthanding it, but if you read it, it's pretty relatable to modern times. Is it really a tangent when it's incorporated to your lesson? It's a tangent I would usually do if I didn't have these slides in front of me. Like it was class setting, trying to like bring the spontaneity. Aporia, wherein a speaker purports or expresses doubt or perplexity regarding a question, it's often feigned, and asks the audience how he ought to proceed. The doubts may appear as rhetorical questions, often in the beginning of text. Now he asks a question. So when will his daughters betray him? I'm waiting. Yeah, I'm waiting too. So far the modern King Lear, his daughters are still too chicken shit to retaliate. But aporia, for an example, we have time at the end. I'll show you a video of a really good example by George Carlin. But a more common one, if you want to see some of his speeches, Steve Jobs, whenever he was introducing new products for Apple, in his speech, he would often do this where he would go and discuss to the audience. He's like, I'm trying to make a new product, but I don't want it to be too heavy. How do we do that? How do we make sure that we have more space for your device, but not so much space in your hand? So what he's actually doing is he's kind of like rhetorically asking questions for himself and showing you the brainstorming in the thought process. It's almost like stream of consciousness where he's allowing you to see the questions that he's asking, but he's going to answer them too. So it's like hyperphora in this case. So it kind of shows that the author is kind of like struggling with the situation, but you know they have an answer to it there. It's kind of like setting up their ethos in that way there. Got a few more. Asterismos. So this is when an author begins their speech or their sentence or whatever with a common phrasing or an exclamation, just to kind of put emphasis on it here. If you ever look at President Obama's speeches, he always begins with, let me be clear, da, 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 da. And he goes on to explain what he's trying to be clear about, right? So his phrasing of let me be clear, comma, whatever he comes afterwards, is a form of asterismos, where it's kind of like a verbal tick, or it's kind of like a stylistic thing, or it's something that authors try to emphasize a point with. I have a few of my own. I'll say something like, okay, folks, comma, something like that. That's my asterismos, right? So it's whatever is your sentence starter or your emphasis or whatever. It's just to make your point clear. This one's easy but tricky. It's chiasmus / antimetabolo. So it's the repetition and or reversal of words or grammatical structure across two phrases. More specific is antimetabolo, which is the switching of words or phrases in order to suggest truth. Okay, this one is easy to see because we do it a lot actually, but it's hard to describe. If you look at the bottom right corner, I give an example where it says, twist facts to suit theories, not theories to suit facts. And you'll see what happened there. We basically flipped it back and forth. The sentence's content, but it's not different structurally. So in this case, that is anti-metabol. But chiasmus is a little bit different here. Chiasmus is to rotate the subjects, where anti-metabol is parallel. So we'll look at the right one, for example. It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. It's literally the same thing, just flipped on its own, right? And we do this a lot because we're trying to do a rhetorical emphasis of one idea flipping into the next one with the same words and so forth. But chiasmus is a little bit different. If you look at this one here, she has all my love, my heart belongs to her. And so it switches from subject to subject. She, which is the other person, has all my love. This is the other person, right? So this is A, this is B. My heart, this is also B, because we're talking about the guy now, right? So it's my love, my heart belongs to her, which ends with A again. And so we're basically kind of flipping the structure around to kind of make a parallel structure in that way, to kind of add sophistication and to add a little bit of poetry into our writing here. It comes up less than anti-metabole over here, but it's still another choice that authors will do to kind of emphasize on their point altogether. And I got two more, sorry. Okay, this one, I think only Devin will understand. This is a video game example I'm gonna give you first, because this one, I had to say it because it kind of sticks with me. So this is meiosis, the one that we've been talking about. It's a biology term too, but it's also in English. And basically it's rhetorical understatement. So you're basically saying something that it's less dramatic than it actually is. So let me give you an example. there's this item in this game called Mirror of Kalandra that I play, and it has a 0.001% drop, which means if you play for 5,000 hours, you might get one. But even then, you might not get one. So if someone actually found this item, they said, oh, it's a pretty decent find, that's meiosis, that's understatement. It's basically kind of to like maybe incite anger into other people, or it's to kind of just make the point that it's actually a bigger deal because your reader knows like, holy shit, he found a mirror, you know what I mean? But it's the point there, right? Where the author does an understatement and it's up to the audience to kind of see like, oh, he's being sarcastic, or he's making the point of, you know, that finding. And I give you a little bit of biography here. I've had a long struggle with this item here. I had a long struggle. You can see from my past that I put a lot of fucking time in this game and I couldn't find one yet. So I'm just saying, life is hard. It's a big meiosis right there. So if anyone ever found one and said that, hey, I got something pretty decent, I'd be like, well, fuck you. You know what I mean? You found a mirror. So that's meiosis. It makes your audience react to what you're saying there. So just saying. Yeah, this is the most relatable name over here I have for my characters.
Get Mr. Lin a mirror for his birthday or what?
So I got one last one before we get to the speech here. I got two. I'm sorry, I keep lying. Pleonasm, which is redundant phrases that emphasize the nature of the subject. So sometimes words aren't strong enough until you put two next to them here. And if authors want to put like really big emphasis on their points here, they'll do double adjectives. So pleonasm is basically, I've had plenty enough of your doubts. It's a true fact. I'm going to give you a free gift. And all these words are redundant, right? But it's the author trying to put emphasis because some words have lost their power or their meaning in, you know, the overall subject matter. Here's the last one. We had this actually in our class, but I only mentioned it like very briefly. Zeugma. It places two nouns with different meanings in a similar position in a sentence. And so zeugma is kind of a weird one because it does a great effect in basically like conserving a verb, but it's maybe tricky for your reader to follow. So I'll read an example. It comes from the book, actually, Things They Carried. It says, but Lavender, who was scared, carried, that's a verb here, carried, 34 rounds when he was shot and killed outside, I don't know how to pronounce it actually, Tenki, I don't know. And he went down under an exceptional burden, more than 20 pounds of ammunition, plus the flak jacket and helmet and rations and water and toilet paper and tranquilizers and all the rest, plus an unweighted fear. So in this case, zeugma is being used because the verb carried is being attributed to two different things here. One is the sort of like physical items of war, right? Of Vietnam War, of being a soldier, of just the struggles of his everyday physical life. But he's also carrying the emotional, the metaphysical, the spiritual, if anything, here. And so what the author's trying to do is have you think about all the things he's carrying with just one sentence combined here. And zeugma is oftentimes kind of tricky because sometimes authors will put two different things that are really juxtaposing with each other, but usually they do relate to kind of develop their point or their character, whatever. So these are all sort of like more advanced devices that exist out there. And if you have questions about them, feel free to ask afterwards. I do want to end with our last classwork of the day though. And if you notice my theme today with the things I've chosen, it deals a lot with lateral thinking versus linear thinking. And so you guys aren't graduating anytime soon, obviously, you have another year, right? But I mean, as we get towards May, it's graduation season. So I wanted to kind of give you a speech to analyze here by Conan O'Brien. It's actually a really good speech that deals a lot with lateral thinking altogether. So this is the prompt, the last classwork that we're going to work together today. And the prompt is simply this. Consider the commencement speech Conan O'Brien, comedian, gave to Dartmouth University in 2010. As you read / listen to his speech, consider the big question from the point of view from a possible graduating student. So this is a tricky part. We can all tell what he's doing well as a rhetorical device and everything here and there, but the added challenge now is to think about, well, what if you were the audience there, right? How is he directly affecting you, or how is he trying to make this impactful for the particular group he is addressing, the kairos? So with that in mind, you're about to graduate and move into the, quote, real world. How does this speech inspire and or reassure you for the future? I want to have you find these three examples. There's plenty to look for, but just in the writing itself, the choices he's made, have you think about three things that he's made specifically to influence, to encourage, to what have you, right? The text in the document itself, but no worries, this video actually has subtitles. So it's a little longer, and that's kind of why I apologize, class might end a little bit later than expected like usual, but it's a good speech. And for those of you who are kind of lost in life, it kind of gives you some ideas. So I'll mute my mic, and then later I'll have you guys look at this real quick.
No, I came here today because, believe it or not, I actually do have something real to tell you. 11 years ago, I gave an address to a graduating class at Harvard. I have not spoken at a graduation since because I thought I had nothing left to say. But then 2010 came. And now I'm here 3,000 miles from my home because I learned a hard but profound lesson last year, and I have to share it with you. In 2000, I told graduates, don't be afraid to fail. Well, now I'm here to tell you that though you should not fear failure, you should do your very best to avoid it. Nietzsche famously said, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What he failed to stress is that it almost kills you. Disappointment stings, and for driven, successful people like yourselves, it is disorienting. What Nietzsche should have said is, whatever doesn't kill you makes you watch a lot of Cartoon Network and drink mid-price Chardonnay at 11 in the morning. Now, by definition, commencement speakers at an Ivy League college are considered successful. But a little over a year ago, I experienced a profound and very public disappointment. I did not get what I wanted, and I left a system that had nurtured and helped define me for the better part of 17 years. I went from being in the center of the grid to not only off the grid, but underneath the coffee table that the grid sits on, lost in the shag carpeting that is underneath the coffee table supporting the grid. It was the making of a career disaster and a terrible analogy. But then something spectacular happened. Fog-bound, with no compass and adrift, I started trying things. I grew a strange cinnamon beard. I dove into the world of social media. I started tweeting my comedy. I threw together a national tour. I played the guitar. I did stand-up, wore a skin-tight blue leather suit, recorded an album, made a documentary, and frightened my friends and family. Ultimately, I abandoned all preconceived perceptions of my career path and stature and took a job on basic cable, with a network most famous for showing reruns, along with sitcoms created by a tall black man who dresses like an old black woman. I did a lot of silly, unconventional, spontaneous, and seemingly irrational things. And guess what? With the exception of the blue leather suit, it was the most satisfying and fascinating year of my professional life. To this day, I still don't understand exactly what happened, but I have never had more fun, been more challenged, and this is important, had more conviction about what I was doing. How could this be true? Well, it's simple. There are few things more liberating in this life than having your worst fear realized. I went to college with many people who prided themselves on knowing exactly who they were and exactly where they were going. At Harvard, 5 different guys in my class told me they would one day be president of the United States. 4 of them were later killed in motel shootouts. The other ones briefly hosted Blue's Clues before dying senselessly in yet another motel shootout. Your path at 22 will not necessarily be your path at 32 or 42. One's dream is constantly evolving, rising and falling, changing course. This happens in every job, but because I have worked in comedy for 25 years, I can probably speak best about my own profession. Way back in the 1940s, there was a very, very funny man named Jack Benny. He was a giant star, easily one of the greatest comedians of his generation. And a much younger man named Johnny Carson wanted very much to be Jack Benny. In some ways he was, but in many ways he wasn't. He emulated Jack Benny, but his own quirks and mannerisms, along with the changing medium, pulled him in a different direction. And yet, his failure to completely become his hero made him the funniest person of his generation. David Letterman wanted to be Johnny Carson, and was not. And as a result, my generation of comedians wanted to be David Letterman. And none of us are. My peers and I have all missed that mark in 1,000 different ways. But the point is this: it is our failure to become our perceived ideal that ultimately defines us and makes us unique. It's not easy, but if you accept your misfortune and handle it right, your perceived failure can become a catalyst for profound reinvention. So, at the age of 47, after 25 years of obsessively pursuing my dream, that dream changed. For decades in show business, the ultimate goal of every comedian was to host The Tonight Show. It was the holy grail. And like many people, I thought that achieving that goal would define me as successful. But that is not true. No specific job or career goal defines me, and it should not define you. In 2000, I told graduates to not be afraid to fail. And I still believe that. But today I tell you that whether you fear it or not, disappointment will come. The beauty is that through disappointment, you can gain clarity, and with clarity comes conviction and true originality. Many of you here today are getting your diploma at this Ivy League school because you have committed yourself to a dream and worked hard to achieve it. And there is no greater cliche in a commencement address than follow your dream. Well, I'm here to tell you that whatever you think your dream is now, it will probably change, and that's okay. 4 years ago, many of you had a specific vision of what your college experience was going to be and who you were going to become. And I bet today most of you would admit that your time here was very different from what you imagined. Your roommates changed, your major changed. For some of you, your sexual orientation changed. I bet some of you have changed your sexual orientation since I began this speech. I know I have. But through the good, and especially the bad, the person you are now is someone you could never have conjured in the fall of 2007. I've told you many things today, most of it foolish, but some of it true. I'd like to end my address by breaking a taboo and quoting myself from 17 months ago. At the end of my final program with NBC, just before signing off, I said, "Work hard, be kind, and amazing things will happen." Today, receiving this honor and speaking to the Dartmouth class of 2011 from behind a tree trunk, I have never believed that more. Thank you very much and congratulations.
So ultimately, it was a pretty good speech that did inspire and kind of encourage those who are moving on here. And that's kind of the persona I want to have you guys consider as you're analyzing this last speech over here. Give you a few minutes to consider if you were a student, in that audience there, or just anyone who was listening upon this speech here, what helps inspire or reassure on this sort of like uncertain future altogether. We'll end with that in your findings altogether. So the speech itself is not too long to go through, and you might have even noticed some of the rhetorical devices that we covered earlier that exist in this speech here. So it's kind of longer than the cat and mouse one, so I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes to break this one down before coming back. All right, about like 3.5 minutes on my clock over here. So for those of you who want to kind of throw in observations from his speech, either just describing what he does from the writing or even just talking about generally what he's doing, feel free to contribute that as well. I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself to contribute. And if you want to raise your hand or just type it, go ahead and do so. So Riddler, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So O'Brien employs and Anadiplosis,
Mhm.
and regarding clarity, in which he encourages the audience to welcome disappointment, as it leads to forming an individual's own character and conviction.
Yeah, a lot of this is really welcoming disappointment, where you're looking at the ethos of a man who's largely successful, but he's basically saying like, well, my success is built off of my ability to be optimistic about the bad times. Be conscious of it, but don't let it overcome you. Anyone else? Other things that you can just even on an appreciation level, if you want to kind of like understand the secret of rhetorical analysis, it's really just things that you can appreciate from an audience's viewpoint. And you're not going to be like an 1800s farmer, but what do you think is like good writing in that case then? Anyone else? Well, that was good, by the way, RJ, that you're quick to use the terms like that.
I just looked it up.
I'm just saying, like covered it up like 10 minutes ago, and you're like, oh, I see it. Oh, good job.
Let's see.
All right, going from Batman over here. So got a collusion dichotomy. He mentions his commencement address at Harvard 10 years ago, which appeals to his readers' pathos from the kairos and also logically shows a progression he claims is okay over time. Absolutely. It shows that despite the split between two different times, his message is still pretty consistent, right? Which could even add to his ethos in this case, where, hey, I've been consistent. I haven't changed whatsoever. Any others? Copy paste this one real quick here. Jolie mentions, use a humorous tone when talking about failure to show that failure and disappointment is inevitable and part of life rather than being sad over it. People should bring out the positives. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes a lot with Anadiplosis that RJ mentions here, where the tone kind of is the sense of welcoming disappointment, because that's how you should be taking it. You shouldn't just be low on the situation altogether. Anyone else? Subway. Slides are in Drive. Drive is this one here. That's the one. Theme is to welcome failure because it's how we learn and grow, and there's no need to be upset over it. Absolutely. So in this case, theme is usually more reserved for like AP Lit, but in this case, you can also use theme to discuss the sort of like general philosophy or idea the author has. Absolutely. Devin, go ahead.
I like this quote a lot. The beauty is that through disappointment you can gain clarity, and with clarity comes conviction and true originality. So I'm pretty sure this is Antonage or whatever. I liked how he says that through this emotion of disappointment you will reach a conclusion that something will happen to you and you will learn something out of this disappointment.
And you're noticing like how he like lists or he bridges like the clarity with clarity, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So in this case, he also in his speech has utilized some of these devices here where he's basically transferred from one idea to another. It's kind of like, just general transfer theory, right? You gain clarity, and what does clarity do? It becomes conviction and true originality. So in this case, author is trying to basically go on a logical kind of tangent from one point to another. Good catch. Good catch. Any others? We got one from irony over here. So let's go right here. People often have different outcomes of their lives from what they originally imagined for themselves. The guys wanted to be president, but were killed. Yeah, the irony, situational irony, where these people, I mean, they went to Harvard, they have like all these great plans, but ultimately they kind of make these ridiculous demises. You know what I mean? So it just shows that you really can't plan for anything here. The document is classwork 3, I believe. Should be the most recent item in the pile.
I forgot what the name of the device was, but it was like when you end like when you end something with a word and you start with like a comma or semicolon with like the same phrase, and it's like no specific job or career goal defines me, and it should not define you. But I'm not sure. It's kind of like a stretch.
Chiasmus or antimetabol?
Because like I think in the eyes of someone who's graduating. Oh wait, I'm sorry, what?
Oh no, I just put the device there. I think that that's the one you're referencing there.
Yeah, I just forgot what it was called again.
Oh no, I see the one. Actually, this one is no, it actually wouldn't be that. Because I don't really want to say it's. In a general sense, he's just repeating the idea of like changing pronouns, right? So he's taking like define, and then later he's changing the pronouns of like you versus was I think me. Oh, it was a big one. Okay, I'm gonna take Muhammad's real quick and see how this one goes. So let me see how much this takes. In this speech, his main goal is to encourage the class of 2011 to pursue their goals in life, but also explain that these goals can change as no one marker establishes the success of your life. For him, the late night show was his pinnacle until he realized it didn't need to be when his life goes through a rough patch. He realizes disappointment is what makes you unique. Failure is something that teaches you, not harms you, even if it feels like it. And I think it's absolutely true. He brings in the anecdotes of his own life here. He brings in all these different like references where despite him having this preconceived notion that 1 year of just doing random stuff is far more, eye-opening or what have you, right? So it kind of shows the contradictions and the further irony of the situation here. Any last person want to throw in one before we kind of just end the session right here? Anybody else? Just from the point of view of a student in this case. Or graduating student, rather. If not, and I think some people might be like typing and copy pasting, whatever, but one thing that I want to end this particular lesson off with is just for the AP exam or for just any writing that you're analyzing here, sophistication, can exist on those devices I provided for you, because it's oftentimes not common to see those from students because they are just that much more obscure and all that there. But one thing to also consider with all the things I brought you here is just to consider that a lot of these authors are basically kind of offering a perspective of seeing life laterally versus linear, right? Don't just think that there is one clear goal or one particular decision. it is more so that you look at all the different alternatives and things that you might want to do or you are afraid to do, and you actually pursue that there. So oftentimes, if you're able to make the inferences of the bigger message that the author is giving you as a human, just as a human, giving tips and advice and so forth, that usually ends up with sophistication in your analysis altogether. So devices, they're not hard to do. Just find a couple of them, you get 4 out of 4. But to do sophistication is to kind of see from a human level what every author is trying to provide you ultimately here. So in this case, I'll open the floor for any questions on Major Paper 5. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them out. But otherwise, for this particular piece, because you have your Major Paper 5 to turn in, I actually did not assign homework for this one here. I just want you to do the classwork for this one to turn in. So give you a little bit more time and focus for the finishing touches of your essay, and then later just turn in the classwork for this one here. But yeah, open floor for questions. What do you got for Major Paper 5, if any? Go ahead and throw some out if you have some.
Mr. Lin, are you going to realistically read 90 2,500 word plus essays?
Yeah, I have time now.
Dang, that's crazy.
It's not hard to do so because all essays are structured in a way that not reads the same, but if you think about all essays, right, there's always going to be a topic sentence I'm looking for, a thesis I'm looking for. What kind of evidence are you looking for? Is it going to be like the most in-depth line-by-line reading? Maybe not, but I can for sure go through and figure out what exactly is your content. Question from Mohammed, for the evidence, does it have to be a paragraph per? Typically, yeah. Otherwise, that paragraph seems to be pointless, if anything, because even if you're just talking about your own life, that's also anecdotal, right? Shayla asked how much will the major paper be out of? It's out of 24, if I recall. So it's always based off the scale of the AP exam of the 6 points. This is however you score in relatively to the point pool. Julie asks, can you explain historical? Could it be like before April, or does it have to be far? So historical usually is on the level of precedence, meaning that it's something that has happened to set our understanding or our sort of like context of the situation itself, right? So I think I mentioned in the first mini lecture about the whole like coronavirus thing, how in 1918, we had 2 different cities react differently to social isolation and the difference of, how actions changed, life or death, right? So in that case, that's historical because it shows precedence. It shows the background that leads up to our understanding or our referencing. Major paper is going to impact your grade, yes. The last actual reading I'll actually have from you guys this year in terms of like a stakes item.
No.
Other questions?
Mr. Lin?
Yes.
Can you clarify what worldly examples are again?
So worldly examples are anything in terms of current events or news or just issues that are existing currently. So just whatever has occurred in recent times as issues. Yes, Andrew, this is just like a Q&A session, so if you need to work on it, go ahead. How much would you dock off over missing certain evidence? So it's basically on the same scale of the AP exam. I think I asked for 4 different types of evidences, and that basically translates to the whole idea of like 1 point for every 2 evidences, right? So kind of using that as a general rule of thumb, like a 0.5 for like an anecdote missing, or a 0.5 from like a historical missing. Ultimately, if you don't reach word count, so word count is, here's the thing I need you guys to understand about word count. It's not just because we want you to write random stuff. It's more so that it's highly unlikely that in anything less you would have a reasonable or in-depth essay. So in the case of this particular essay, if you're off by like a few tens, maybe even 100 or so, it's not going to hurt you. It's more so of like, you should have gone at least that far. No one else for questions? For the evidence, we have to use all the types of evidence, or is our evidence limited to those options? See, Julie. So you do need to use every evidence type. I don't know what other types of evidence you might be considering outside of those, but otherwise I do encourage and require those 4 different types of evidences.
So you know how there are like 2 worldly connections, but since my essay, like, it heavily revolves around like the current pandemic, is it okay if I just do like one that's also kind of similar? Okay, because like it's like I heavily talk about like corona already in both like my intro and bits of my body as well.
I mean, it seems to be, again, 1, it's a worldly event that's going on right now, and 2, it is kind of a main source of observation, so that's not a bad choice to do so. And especially since it's only like 2 paragraphs, not a big deal. Linda asks, is the homework/classwork extra credit, or does it actually count towards our grading period 6th grade? So the current work that you're doing right now affects your grading period 5 grade. So whatever you are adding on is affecting you mostly for the positive. My general operation is probably going to be like this, where your grading period 5 grade is going to copy and paste into your grading period 6th grade. So in this case, whatever you have done now is going to influence what your next grade starts off with. Can worldly connections tie in with reading evidences or expand it on in conclusions? You can tie anything together. I don't know if you mean like double dipping evidence, but otherwise you can always synthesize 2 different types of evidences with each other. Grading period 6 starts, I believe, April 22nd. It's going to be a super short one just because of what's happening right now. So technically we do end around June, early June, but because we put spring break to the end of our entire school year, it's going to end May 28th. No, it doesn't have to be 2 evidences per paragraph. It's more so that it's nice if you do, because if you only have like singular evidence paragraphs, it does seem very limited, even though you're talking very well about your source that you're doing, especially for anecdotal, right? Your reader's going to think like, well, just this one story, you know what I mean? Like, doesn't relate with anything else. It's preferable that you, as much as you can, or in different circumstances here and there, combine 2 evidences with each other. All right, well, good luck with all your endeavors for all the different things you guys are doing.
Mr. Lin.
Yes.
When will you come home?
Sorry, I'm still getting the milk. See, Jonathan. See my train? Farewell, Brandon. That's very formal. Oh, okay, see, Jonathan.
Wait, so for classwork, we turned in like the classwork we did today on Classroom?
What to
Can
put it up yet?
Can I send you a picture I did in my notebook?
That's fine. Is it legible? See, Elizabeth.
It's a lot worse today. I don't know why.
All right, we'll see what happens first. Okay. See, Mohammed.
Okay.
See you, Hannah.
Liv, is
Yes.
it if I use too much evidence, will I get this like lose points?
I don't know what you mean by too much, though.
Maybe like 2 plus 2.
No, maybe if they're really long-winded and they're just like purely exposition, then yeah, I would say don't do that. But if you're doing like multiple examples, then
Oh,
that's
okay.
fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lin.
Hey, what's up?
You go first, Owen.
Oh, say I'm out here rubbing out.
CSR.
Oh, Mr. Lin.
Yes.
I feel like the structure of my essay, I'm pretty proud of it. I feel like this major paper, it's not gonna be shit. I'm proud of it.
So, are you gonna cry by saying anything otherwise?
Well, I mean, yes, but no.
Okay.
I'll be willing to take criticism.
Okay, that's fair. That's good. I mean, it's good that you have confidence in the work.
Yes, it's just that like it's something different, but I honestly struggle with the word count because sometimes I felt like I was writing for a word count other than like for concisity, if that makes sense.
I think I know what you mean. I think you mean that you're trying to say your point and nothing past that so that it doesn't clog up the point.
Yeah.
Can I unsubmit my essay and revise it?
Did you already submit it?
Yeah.
Then yeah, you should be able to then.
Pog.
What's up?
So in the classwork and homework that we've been doing, so does it basically just reading period 5 grade by 1% per like thing you turn in?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And then whatever grade you score in grading period 5, I'm just going to transfer for next grading period as well. So just as a hypothetical, let's say you have a B plus right now for grading period 5's end, then later your B plus would transfer to grading period 6 as well. And then whatever work you do in grading period 6 will affect that.
Okay, thanks.
Any last questions?
Good luck.
With?
My essay.
Likewise.
I was mostly going for word count.
Well, I mean, you still have time to revise if you are done already. Revision is actually the hard part, though.
I'm just worried about evidence, like historical. That's all.
Well, what's your topic?
Like the entire internet, why it's like more harming. I don't know.
I feel like that's not a hard one to do in the sense that a lot of people do blame not even social media, right? Just like the internet as a cesspool of anything. So
yeah,
different outlets could be your historical example because there's been a lot of drama and incidents that revolve around the internet.
Oh yeah, definitely. Would you count this for a historical? I talked about Anonymous, right?
Mm-hmm.
I listed like several incidents where like they attacked people and organizations.
Sure.
All right, I think that's great. Thank you, sir.
And you could even talk about. I think this is kind of recent too when people were like blaming social media for political interference.
Oh really? I didn't think about that.
Because they were basically spamming real accounts, like real people's Facebook pages and whatever with ads that included like propaganda essentially. And so in that case, people were like, well, where's the accountability for social media?
Yeah, I talked about that with influencers as well, where like there's this like fire festival in 2017, which turned out to be like a huge scam, wire fraud.
Yep.
All right. That's all, Mr. Lin. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Mr. May?
Oh, let me answer Evan's question real quick. Do videos count? Yes, because those are technically like quote unquote readings. They are like basically live documents. So you can use videos as well. Oh, what was your question? Go ahead.
Oh, Mr. Lin, would you recommend? So I feel like I'm structuring my essay in that like I focus on like physical and mental aspects of like the impacts of social media, and like then there is like but there's also the side of social media which is like its implications on like its usage, such as like I saw this article about people are defending pedophilia on social media and that shouldn't be allowed, right? And I don't know. I feel like if my essay is largely structured towards like the effects on the individual rather than like holistically, do you think that I should include like further evidences, such as like the pedophilia one?
So you're saying that it might only affect a few individuals rather than like a whole culture.
I'm saying like, do you think that I should include diversify my topic, even though it's like already structured, even though like it's primarily focused on like medical and physical aspects of the implications of social media?
No, I feel like you want to avoid too far of tangents because that one's more of social norms and taboos.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Mr. Lynn.
No worries. Anybody else for questions?
See you, Mr. Lin.
See, Devin, go give me a mirror. All right, if no further questions, then you can definitely just ask questions via email, the mail, reminded, all of that. But otherwise, I will see you guys on Wednesday. Wait, what's this? What do you think of the platform? You mean like my general impressions of it, or? Well, truth be told, it's been a while since I've watched modern movies. Actually, most of my knowledge is kind of like older movies, so I haven't seen this one yet. Is it good? You know, what's funny is a lot of movies right now are discussing that, and so the works of a generation usually indicate the major issue that people are dealing with. So in this case, movies like this one, for example, again, I haven't seen it, so I don't know, but that along with that movie that came out, I actually watched this one, I watched Parasite, and if the general theme is people criticizing the rich and so forth, it seems to be that authors feel like it's their duty to kind of portray this consciousness on the people now. That's been the job of authors in all time periods. All right, well, folks, if nothing else, then I will see you on Wednesday. Good luck on your major papers, and if you have any last moment questions, hope you ask earlier. So I will see you guys next time.